deadline for each assignment, and if they missed one, they were out. So it makes every homework assignment important, and they're not going to have their levels of effort fluctuate. They're going to have to give me 100% the whole way. The deadlines, by the way, I open the assignments up the night before I cover them, and I now give them until the second night after I cover the material to turn it in. So they had really a period of 3 days where they could work on their homework. I try to set them up so that they always had a chance to come back to class and ask their questions. Although, like if you've been using my math lab for a while, you start to see that the number of questions you get really drops. Quizzes. I give 2 quizzes for each chapter, one for the first half, one for the second. I let them take it as many times as they want. At the developmental math level, infinity is approximately equal to 3 maximum. But the idea is that I encourage them to take that first attempt as sort of a quick assessment of where they are and where they need to work. And then the follow-up quizzes are where they prove that they've mastered the material. And again, as is the default, the highest score counted. Pencil and paper exams, we took an exam at the end of every chapter. There were 6 that semester. And I'll give you the breakdown. I know that in California, we may cover different topics in intermediate than you do here. And so I'll show you what that's about in a moment. Okay, so how'd it go? I really like the discussion you were having about, is it 22 or 25 students? In California, our classes are capped at 40. That's where we start. I happen to be teaching in a slightly larger room. There were no openings anywhere, so I ended up starting with 54 students because I just had trouble saying no to them. I started with 54, I kept 49, which at our school is about 8% higher than the normal retention. I'll show you that in a moment. 37 students ended up passing the class. Do you think is that a high number for intermediate? 37 out of 54, almost 70%? It is at our school, and I'll show you that as well. My question for you is, out of the 54 that started, out of those 37 that passed, how many do you think met the entire contract? That's, again, 100% on every single homework assignment, an average of at least 80 on the quizzes, an average of at least 70 on the pencil and paper exams, and no more than 2 absences. What would you think out of 54? Let me ask it in a different fashion. How many would you think out of 54 if the contract wasn't in place? Big number? Small number? I think it'd be pretty small. Okay? I had 30 students complete that contract. And what this contract really, developmental math students are a little low on motivation. They're not intrinsically motivated. So the idea was to try to find something on the outside to motivate them, and I played on their fear. Developmental math students are petrified of the big event at the end of the semester. They think that they can learn it in pieces, but they're not sure that they can put it all together at the end of the semester when it matters. They have no confidence. So I played on that fear and said, hey, here's your chance to get out of that event. All you have to do are these 4 easy things that'll take you all semester to do. So I had 30 out of 54. If you told me that half of my students, or more than half of my students, would be there almost every day, right, missing no more than 2, would have perfect homework scores, quiz averages in the 80s, test averages of at least 70, I'd be pretty happy to teach that class. So a little perspective, on the left-hand side, the first column, these are the results from my contract semester. Again, 68.5% pass, retention rate 90.7. Right next to that is the previous semester, my intermediate algebra classes. I had a 49% success rate. My retention, I keep students, my retention is usually a little higher than my colleagues. My students, for some reason, think that things are going really well, even when they're not. And they stay longer than maybe some of them should. On the right-hand side, same semester, campus-wide, same course. So in the semester where 48% of the students passed intermediate, which is pretty normal at our school, I had 68.5%. Yeah. Yeah, so in both, exactly. The only difference was the contract. I still graded on the same scale. They still had my math lab homework, but they approached the homework a lot differently because one, they knew they needed 100%. Two, they knew that they were going to see similar problems when it was time for the My Math Lab quiz, so they took these problems real seriously. In the no contract, it was that same grading scale, 100 out of 1,200, so 8% roughly. Same thing for the quizzes, 8%. I think what it did was it got them to work the way that I wanted them to work. It got them to take everything a little more seriously at the beginning. And what we know with developmental math students, once they reach some success, it's contagious. And they want to keep doing what's working. I used to think that developmental math students maybe didn't want to succeed. And I don't think that that's true at all. I think that they all want to succeed. They just don't know how to get that started. And this contract, and some of the other contracts I use, get that ball rolling for them a little bit. And once they get started, and I'll show you this in a minute, the effort increases as the semester goes on. Test averages. This to me was the most telling result. On the right-hand side, my classes without the contract. On the left-hand side, my classes with the contract. These are pencil and paper exams, and they were similar exams. They were not identical, but they were very similar. I used one to develop the next semester. 74%, nearly 3/4, had an A or B test average. So what I'm saying that this contract did was it pulled the students from low performing to high performing in what's our traditional measure of success. Pulling them towards the top. Getting a lot of students to go from the D and F range into the C range, to me, isn't necessarily a success, because a C in one developmental math course often leads to trouble in the next one. We want more high-performing students, and this did it for me. Success rate by exam. On the left-hand side are the topics. Our intermediate starts with a chapter we call the transition chapter. It's review and new material at the same time. We review linear equations. We solve absolute value equations. We review linear inequalities. We solve absolute value inequalities. We review 2x2 systems. We solve 3x3 systems. So something old, something new. Any of those jump out at you? At our school, there's what we call the old 1-2. Radicals starts the trouble for students, and if they survive to logarithms, that finishes them off. Right? Take a look at the difference in success rate for those two exams. From 55 to nearly 80% of the students passing the radical exam. From 36% passing the log exam, which is really common, that just about doubled to 72%. When developmental students are starting to fade, these students were starting to turn it on. Next slide. Percentage of A's by exam. 44%, 42%. 1 out of 3 students got an A on the log and exponential exam. If you told me before the semester started that that would be the case, I would have thought, 1, I only have 3 students left, or 2, this has been a great class to teach. Right? I'm real happy with that result. So from 12% A's to 33% A's, that's a tough exam. Right? And in our intermediate algebra, students, it's a pretty intensive applied problem chapter. They're deriving their own rates of decay, right, for the exponential decay problems, their own growth rates. It's not like we just hand it to them and say, here, you know, do this problem with this formula. It's a tough exam. They're graphing, they're solving all sorts of equations. I'm pretty happy at 33%.